Please welcome to the stage the Master of Ceremonies, Penny Abewardina.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very critical conversation we are about to have. The session is called Navigating a New Global Security Era, Women in Leadership. This will be a conversation composed solely of female leaders across strategic security positions, where they will share their insights in the current state of geopolitical dynamics and the imperative need to continue diversifying C-suite representation around the world to ensure the considerations of well-rounded perspectives. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Her Excellency María Fernanda Espinosa and our esteemed panel.
Well, well, well. Very good afternoon. My name is María Fernanda Espinosa. I am a former president of the UN General Assembly and CEO of GWL Voices. And I'm joined here by a stellar panel. But let us introduce a little bit the topic of today. I think that, as we know, the world continues to navigate an increasingly complex international security landscape. I don't need to tell you that. With the ongoing conflicts and wars around the world, the stakes for global peace and security have never been higher. These challenges demand, of course, collective efforts and global cooperation with contributions from all corners of society, but more specifically from 50+% of the world's population, from women. I think that in this context, it is essential to recognize the significant but still limited and undervalued representation of women in high-ranking national security positions. Despite notable progress, of course, women remained underrepresented in many of the most crucial decision-making spaces that shape our global security. Today, we all are very privileged to be joined by these incredible female leaders who have excelled in this arena, offering invaluable perspectives on the current geopolitical dynamics and the pressing need for more diverse executive leadership worldwide, placing, of course, women and girls at the center. Let me introduce you. First, Anna Morris, Acting Assistant Secretary for Terrorist Financing and Financial Crimes at the U.S. Department of Treasury. Welcome, Anna. The Honorable Henrietta Fore, Chairman and CEO of Holzman International, and Honorable Melanne Verveer, former U.S. Ambassador for Global Women's Issues and Director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. So without further ado, let's start with this vital conversation. Let me start with you, Anna. And the question to you would be, how can the United States brace for potential threats to the international financial system, particularly in a time of multiple wars and increasing global tensions?
Thank you for that.
3 minutes. I'm sorry. Time is short, so I have to remind our 3 minutes, and then a second round, of course.
And thank you for the great question. In a word, partnerships. So partnerships with our allies and our partners around the world who see the need to defend their financial systems from abuse by the actors that would undermine international peace and security. And to say a word about the most well-understood financial measure that the United States uses is sanctions. And of course, over the past 10 to 20 years, the use of sanctions in the service of U.S. foreign policy has gone up every year, year on year. It goes up basically in an unbroken line. And the reason for that is because decision makers have seen the value of focusing on the financial aspect of ensuring international peace and security. And then thinking about partners, if we think about the most significant international security challenge we have faced over the past few years, it has been Russia's further invasion of Ukraine. And that was met with the largest multilateral sanctions response the world has ever seen, between the United States, G7 partners, and like-minded partners. And essentially, what these countries all said was, we are going to cut Russia off from the international financial system in order to prevent Russia from using our financial system to raise the money it needs to prosecute the war in Ukraine, and from stopping it from purchasing those goods that end up on the battlefield. And this actually represents something of a philosophical shift. The United States has used sanctions for a long time, as have our partners, but you saw partners, in particular sanction skeptics like the European Union, also come to the view, given the gravity of a land war in Europe in 2022, that their financial system also must not be used to abet the undermining of European security. So I think as we think to the future, these partnerships and alignment on financial defense will be critical.
Well, the keywords, partnerships and alignments for financial defense. I think that's the sentence that we all stay with. Let me now turn to Henrietta. Henrietta, you have led UNICEF for many years and have done it brilliantly. So you have firsthand experience on the humanitarian challenges that we face, especially in a world with more than 100 active conflicts going on. So what are the cross-sectoral strategies that are needed to guarantee support, access, and deployment in situations of crisis?
Maria, Fernanda, it is a big question, so let me approach it from a couple of angles. The first is, if you're doing humanitarian work anywhere in the world, and many of you are, what you really want is peace. I mean, it is the one thing that allows cross-sectorial work in humanitarian work. It is very, very difficult to get any of your single activity work done. So at a UNICEF, as most of you know, we are immunizing children. That might happen in a campaign. But then we also need to feed them. We need to open the schools. We need to have health systems open. So all of these cross-sectoral activities need peace. In years past, there used to be something called a humanitarian corridor. I would really love it if we could get back to having humanitarian corridors. Now what we have are humanitarian pauses, if we are lucky. But the world is a lot more brutish and violent than it has been. And it just means that civilians are in the way. And as a result, the behavior is just, it is very tough out there. So I would say peace is number one. The second one is, I think we often think that small indigenous projects are enough. But for those of us who've worked in the world, and Melanne and I have been out there for a while, you really need some big cross-cutting things at work in a country. So water systems, it helps health, it helps humans to stay alive, it helps in pandemics or epidemics. It's cross-sectoral, it is very important. So you can get water systems, energy systems, health systems, school systems to be operating. It means that you can do all kinds of cross-sectoral work in humanitarian situations. So think big, think public-private partnerships, think public-private finance. We've gotten away from some of this because we are doing humanitarian work and not development work, which is longer term, and we have to connect those two now. And then the third thing that I am seeing that's really grown up recently is there's a need for self-sufficiency. You realize how isolated you are when, let's say, a storm comes through, a hurricane comes through, and you're in Beira, Mozambique, and you are cut off from the rest of the country. You need to try to have in your town, in your country, self-sufficiency enough so that when times of humanitarian need hit, whether it's a man-made or a natural disaster, that you can be self-sufficient. So those are three ideas.
Well, thank you, Henrietta, and it really shows the experience you have on the ground. I really like your three keywords: peace, humanitarian corridors, possibilities, physical possibilities to access humanitarian aid in situations of conflict. The second, think big, you said, think big. It's a cross-sectoral effort. It is health, water, education coming all together, and for that, private-public partnerships are central, and of course, self-sufficiency. It's what we call in the world of today resilience building, in communities to be able to endure all kinds of shocks and crises, of course. Let me now turn to you, Melanne. In the current world, in the world that we live of compounded crisis, of conflict, of fear, what can governments do in these rising challenges facing, the political, economic, and social advancement of women? We make up more than half of the world's population. What is the role of women in making sure that we build a more peaceful, a safer world for all of us?
Well, here we are in 2024, and we are still talking about half the world's population that is not meaningfully, fully participating. And the World Economic Forum, as I'm sure many of you know, does an annual gender gap report. And that gender gap has barely closed it hasn't closed at all, but it's barely made progress in the decades that it's been proceeding. And the biggest gaps continue to exist in economic participation and political participation. And yet we know it's an evidence-based case of what women contribute in these spaces, their perspectives, their experiences, their leadership, their talents are continually moved away from decision-making forums where they critically need to be participating and where they would bring greater effectiveness to the outcome. So think about for a moment, since many here in the room represent both governments, civil society, and especially the private sector, what we know about women's economic participation, which essentially is it grows economies. The more women are participating economically, the greater growth and progress we're going to see in economies around the world. And yet women face all kinds of barriers to that. The World Bank's Women, Business, and the Law has many governments imposing those barriers in terms of the kinds of regulations that they impose that restrict women's meaningful participation. There are barriers to entrepreneurship, and we know that small and medium-sized businesses are a force for growth, wind at the backs of economies, and yet access to credit, one of the biggest problems in the world if you're an entrepreneur, access to markets, where are our trade policies, access to training, something I think everybody can relate to. Technology today, all important in terms of creating those new opportunities and facilitating entrepreneurship. And climate, while it's a huge problem that we face, our existential threat, it is a time of opportunity as well, because moving even the poorest women in the global south to having access to renewable energy, for example, also creates companion entrepreneurship opportunities for them. Where this has happened, they're growing installations of solar panels, they're selling and maintaining clean cook stoves, where regenerative agriculture has taken place, they're more protective farmers. So I think we have to look more at this economic space, which is critically important, and the role that women could play much more significantly, and we really have to consider the data. The data is there significantly. Just let me quickly mention, because I know the clock is going, political participation is the hardest gap to close. And today there is a backlash in terms of political violence to keep women away from that kind of participation. And María Fernanda has been leading the Global Women Voices campaign. We're here at the United Nations this week. The United Nations was founded in 1945. There's never been a Secretary General. And I know there's plenty of talent out there around the world that could be considered for this and should be. But in all the realms, governments have the opportunity to really bring in greater diversity that would produce more effective outcomes into their policies. And then the whole world of peace building, which we opened with, the security of the world and the role that women have to play increasingly in peace and security, needs to be tapped.
Excellent. Women's economic empowerment, I think it's critical. It's a win-win. It helps growth, it helps sustainability, it helps women's rights. So it really makes sense, but it's not happening fully yet. So that's one. And the second one, women's political participation. Let me, give you a little number of today. I think that there are 134 heads of state and government speaking today and tomorrow at the General Assembly this week. 130 plus, or 34, I think. Only 9 are women heads of state and government out of 134. So this is a huge gap to fill. And of course, we are insisting, thank you for reminding our campaign, next Secretary General of the UN has to be a female. So thank you, Melanne, for that.
If I could just say one quick thing. According to the WEF, it will take more than 130 years at the rate we are going to close the gender gap. 130 years. I don't think we can afford that.
Can't we wait 130 years? Absolutely not. We have a few minutes left, few seconds for each one of you. Let me come back to Anne with this question. What would you say to young women that want to enter the realm of politics, that want to enter the realm of security, which is a very male-driven space? When you talk about financial security, what would be your message for the younger generation saying, that's the place or that's the space where I would like to be? As a former Minister of Defense, I know the security space is very much male-dominated yet. Please, Anne.
We have to close the gender gap, but I would encourage them to look at the women I'm surrounded by here, to look at my boss, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and to be encouraged by their success. But I would say for these jobs, these national security jobs, these jobs that implicate issues of peace and stability, you have to show up. You have to be in the office. You have to benefit from the experience of people who have done this kind of work for many years. You have to be in the conversation. You have to work hard. There's no getting around it, and come with a positive attitude. And always articulate where you want to go, because the people who have gotten there are happy to help you understand how you might get there as well.
Thank you very much, Anna. Intergenerational dialogue and mutual learning is absolutely critical. Henrietta, what would you say?
So I think one of the skills we now need in our world are people that can connect one sector to another. The people who make those connections, those matrix connections, are going to be in huge demand across technology and security in every sector. And so the more that you can spend time in business, in government, in nonprofits, in academia, the better, so that you become, whether it's a tri-sector athlete or a quad sector athlete, I think that will be extremely important. The other characteristics that I have seen useful in government, in business, and in nonprofits is that of being an entrepreneur. They all need you to be entrepreneurial, to get your programs moving, to move them now, to get some speed behind them, some money behind them, some actual action on the ground. So be an entrepreneur.
Be an entrepreneur. Cannot be better. And intergenerational dialogue, be entrepreneurial, that is a word that I need to practice in English, and partnerships, dialogue and partnership, absolutely critical. Melanne, what would you say to younger generations?
Well, I'm in a milieu where I'm constantly meeting a younger generation at Georgetown University, and they are passionate. They are trying to get the best education they can and to equip themselves, and they are determined to make a difference. And I think all of those are necessary ingredients to pursuing the kind of career and difference that young people can make. I would also say that enhancing their confidence and their ability to do it, but also not to look at one sector that has all the answers, Whether you're in the private sector, in civil society, in government, differences can be made, and everyone working collaboratively is the best outcome of all. And we've got countless examples of those three legs of the stool working together. And when one leg is broken or doesn't exist, it topples over. It's not so steady. We really need everybody. And I want young people to understand that if their passion is in one direction, there are multiple ways in which they can do that. And the fact that, you know, life is a zigzag. And sometimes you zag this way, and then it goes that way. And those opportunities come in those zigs and zags, and to seize them when they present themselves, because I think it's really hard at a certain early point in your life to know what's ahead. I certainly wouldn't have been in the positions I've been in if I thought I knew that was going to happen. But passion and equipping yourself with the best education and experiences that one can get.
Wow. This was powerful. Our time is up, but what are the takeaways? 2 sentences to say, we need more women in power and with power to build more peaceful societies. That's what we've been hearing. We need passion, we need resolve, and we need to work from a whole of society approach. We all count, we all have a voice, we all have power at the end of the day. So let's build more peaceful societies with women and girls at the center. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you to our amazing panel. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Henrietta. Thank you, Melanne.